All right, I'm Tasha Ring, and I am Director and Principal Consultant at Meridian Learning, which is a resource and advocacy organization for grassroots microschools and inspired teacherpreneurs across the education spectrum. And Meridian has our own microschools, our grassroots microschools. We have 3 of them. Right now, we're getting ready to launch our 4th and final microschool this upcoming fall, in fall of 2022. And my topic tonight is how to start a microschool, but not just how to start any microschool, how to start a sustainable grassroots microschool, and sharing my story, some tips that I've learned along the way. So I just want to kind of introduce myself with how it all came to be. I started out as a traveling tutor for homeschooling families in the 2008-2009 school year. So this was a while ago. So it was a long time ago. It feels like it's been a long time. So that was the 2008-2009 school year. I was a traveling tutor for homeschool families and a licensed teacher. I'm still licensed in the state of Ohio. I was licensed in Indiana and Ohio for a while. And I also had Montessori training. So I was primarily working with homeschooling families who were interested in the Montessori philosophy. And I established an LLC in that same year, in August of 2008. I had to look up some of this because it's been so long that I kind of forgot. I've been talking a lot about it in the last 2 years, but it's been kind of surreal to talk so much in the last 2 years about something I've been doing for so long. But it's been a great opportunity for me to kind of look back and think about some of the things that happened along the way. And so then in 2009-2010 school year, that's when I started the first Meridian microschool called Meridian Montessori. And in 2016, so this was 7 years later, we started the 2nd and the 3rd. The 3rd did not become really a full-fledged program until we moved it to its current location, which is Cincinnati, Ohio, in 2020. And we had plans to move it to Cincinnati prior to the pandemic. Those plans were in place, and then the pandemic happened, and a lot has happened since then. So, and then next fall, like I shared, we're starting the 4th and final one. It's our adolescent microschool for students 12 to 18. And so a lot has happened along the way. I think I have some slides to share. I don't know if I'm able to do that. Steve, am I able to share slides? I think I can share screen, right? I want to share some slides if I can.
You can share your slides.
Okay, great. I think I'm moderator now, or I'm able to share things.
Yeah, you're the co-host.
Oh, great. Okay. So let's see. I have some photos. Really, it's a photo gallery. Here it is. Okay. I'll share my screen so you can see. So this is our photo gallery on our webpage. They are thumbnail photos, but these are just some snapshots of our classrooms. We have a 0 to 3, so an infant and toddler microschool. And we don't really call that one a microschool. We call it a boutique toddler program and a boutique preschool, but it is a microschool. This is our elementary Meridian microschool. This is we have a parent-child class. This is our elementary right here. This is a parent event. This is our outdoor space and our elementary. So you can find this at meridian-learning.org. You can see our photo gallery. So not all of these programs started at the same time. It was over a period of years. And I've learned quite a bit along the way. I kind of break it down into 4 different categories in terms of thinking about starting a micro school and thinking about, sustaining it, because we see a lot of people right now, which is awesome, wanting to start a micro school. I'm assuming that's why some of you are here, and thinking about, the best way to launch one. But our focus really for the last few years has been sustainability and, making sure that we're doing the things that we need to do to be around in 5 to 10 years. Some of the people I know who launched micro schools a few years ago, they're getting ready to move on. They're getting ready to hand over operations to someone else or sell. So marketing, I think, is very important. Funding is something that we get asked a lot about. The legal and financial piece, certainly when you're starting up, that's something to think about. And then the administrative piece. And so I am maybe in a unique position now because I am still in the classroom. I think a lot of people who start micro schools initially are what we call teacher leaders, and they're leading the micro school and they're teaching at the same time. And so for many years, it was just me. When I was a traveling tutor, it was just me. And then when I launched the micro school in the first micro school in 2009, it was just me for a while. And then I had an intern, and that's one thing that I often talk about in terms of, how to kind of bring in people to help or how to outsource. I call it outsourcing. I had an intern for a little while, and then she became an assistant. And then later on, when I was on maternity leave, she became the lead teacher. So that worked out very well. I had a great relationship with the university in Indianapolis, which is where that first micro school was launched. And I taught as an adjunct at the university. So that was a great way to meet people, students, student teachers, and people who were in the College of Education where I was an adjunct. And as I was thinking about sustainability, I was thinking about how some of the things that we have done over the years to make the school more sustainable and the schools more sustainable it's actually created more work for me. And that's, I think that's just kind of how it works sometimes. But some of the things that I think about, when it comes to sustainability are, how are you going to fund your school? How are you going to keep it funded? And how are you going to do all the things that need to be done? And so you're really running a business. And I think that's been made clear over the last, couple of years. We've been talking a lot about Microschool. You're really starting a business and you run it as a business, but it's a unique situation because this business that you're running, your clients are your students and their parents and their families, and they probably don't want to feel my experience has been that they don't want to really look at it as a business. Now, part of our job as teacher leaders, administrators, is the parent education and helping our invested families to see that this is a school and it's also a business, and we want to stick around and we want to be here for a while. And so you are running a business, but there are these nuances in the micro school business that you have to consider. And with the Meridian micro schools, all of ours are Montessori based. So there are things that we have to consider there too, because we're not doing things, in all of the ways that traditional, quote unquote, traditional Montessori schools are doing things. So marketing, funding, legal, financial, administrative are the 4 kind of topics that I have written down, and thinking in terms of setting your school up to be sustainable. Does anybody have any questions that you want to bring forth so that I can include those in my slides that I'm sharing next? I think you can type them too. Okay, I can see those. How did you choose between an LLC or a nonprofit? Okay, so that's actually one of my I don't know if you can see that. It's something I printed out. It says related to money, for profit or nonprofit, and why. Meridian Learning actually, we have a summer conference. We don't do it every year, but our last conference was last summer, our Grassroots Microschools conference, and the topic was sustainability. And we took 5 questions related to sustainability, and we answered them in one of our sessions. And one of those questions was related to money, for profit, nonprofit, and why. So I started the LLC in 2008. And the reason I started as an LLC is because it was just me and I was a traveling tutor, which, by the way, I think is a great way to start. I can't say that that was something that I necessarily thought too much about. We didn't have a space. I didn't have a physical space. I had an idea for the microschool probably in 2006, honestly. I think I started imagining this microschool, the first microschool that we started. I started thinking about 2006, but in 2008, I just did what I was able to do. And I knew that I needed to have a legal business entity, right? And so that's why that legal and financial piece, getting all your legal and financial ducks in a row, is really important. We get a lot of questions about that too. I mean, certainly you don't have to have all your ducks in a row, but I think it helps in terms of sustainability. So most micro schools that I know are LLCs, and we have remained an LLC for a number of reasons. And we actually have consulted numerous people and organizations about it. And for us, it really is better to be an LLC. There are some people that I can connect you with if you are kind of weighing that, should we be an LLC? Should we be a non-for-profit? You can start out as an LLC and then become a nonprofit or create a separate nonprofit. That is an option as well. I know that's something that we've looked into. The piece about nonprofit is that it's a lot of work to fundraise. And if I could just name one reason that we haven't done it, it's because it creates a lot more work. And if you don't have someone who is really good at that, or you don't outsource, here's outsourcing again, have someone that you can tap to do that for you. If you're not able to do it, most of us who are running micro schools, I'm still teaching part-time. I'm still in the classroom every day, Monday through Thursday. And then I do administrative work in the summer. I do consulting for other micro school leaders or aspiring micro school leaders. I primarily do that in June, July, and part of August. But during the school year, which for us is September to May, I'm still in the classroom guiding classes part-time. And I didn't have time to do a lot of fundraising. If you bring somebody in and, like I said, I think one of the things you can do to make the school more sustainable is bringing in more people and hiring more staff. But then that does create more work, because then you have to manage people. If you love to manage people, it's great. That wasn't necessarily one of my strengths, but I've had to learn how to do it. So if you have someone who is really good at that, or if you have the time to do it, then I think, then becoming a nonprofit or starting out as a nonprofit is definitely something to consider. It may make you more sustainable, your school be more sustainable, or it may not. So the legal and financial piece, yes, most micro schools are LLCs. I think the bare minimum that you would need is an EIN, a business checking account. I think my recommendation is always to find an attorney who really understands what you're doing and who understands laws in your state. Meridian gets a lot of questions in our grassroots microschool group, especially about, can I do this? And it really is dependent on your state and even sometimes your city, local zoning. And so there's not necessarily one person or a Facebook group that you can, certainly you can hear about what other people have done, but no one can really tell you, how you should do it. Now, if you find another microschool leader, which is another thing that we try to do, is connect aspiring microschool leaders with other leaders, established leaders in their state. We're able to do that more often now because there are more people with microschools. 5 or 6 years ago when we were doing this, there weren't a lot of microschools, so we weren't able to do that. But they can tell you what they did, but I wouldn't necessarily assume that they've done everything right either. So I really recommend finding an attorney who understands what you're doing. My particular story was that one of my first clients, I think this was back in 2008 or 2009, his father was an attorney and had done a lot of work with small businesses. So he really understood what I was doing, and that helped. And I think that the micro school, the grassroots micro school evolved from homeschooling. And if you connect to the homeschooling community, or you connect to homeschooling resources, or maybe an attorney or someone who has worked with homeschooling groups or families, that can be helpful too, because there are some similarities. And a couple organizations that I can recommend: Homeschool CPA, Carol Top, Homeschool CPA. She has done all of Meridian's sessions related to financial setup for micro schools, and just the differences between the homeschool or a homeschool co-op and a micro school. And then HSLDA, I'm not super familiar with the people there, but it is a legal resource that could be a benefit, not necessarily specifically for micro schools, but for homeschool organizations. All right, I'm going to pull up my chat so I can see. Please share those docs. Yeah, I mean, yeah, hopefully I'm giving you some good information about just what we did. I mean, I've been doing this for 13 years, so I think that's one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about sustainability. When Steve said, what would you be interested in talking about? That's something, because for me, it's very important not just to talk about how to start a micro school. We're to the point now where I think, a lot of people are saying, not only would I like to start when I want to stick around. And like any small business, a lot of them, are not successful because they aren't set up necessarily to succeed. So, and this is a very unique business in my mind. Do I have any social media to contact me? You can contact me directly via email. That's the best way to reach me, is Tasha at Meridian-learning.org. That is the best way to reach me. The Twitter is at Join Meridian, and Meridian is also on Instagram, Meridian Learning, and on Facebook, Meridian Learning. But the best way to reach me personally is via email. So that's Tasha, Tasha, at meridian-learning.org. What kind of lawyer would we need to look for? I think I mentioned earlier that the lawyer that I used initially was one who had helped people set up small businesses, but he understood the kind of small business that I was trying to set up, which at the time was as a traveling tutor for homeschooling families. And then that evolved, which is really, like I said, how the grassroots micro school came to be. I think if you go to Wikipedia, it actually says that this is an example where Wikipedia is correct. It says, the term micro school was first introduced in 2009. I think in the UK, there were a group of people, and we were in a Yahoo group, and then we transferred that group to Google, and then eventually it came over to Facebook, but where we started using that term. And it was around 2009, 2010. And it was really among homeschoolers who were starting little schools and started using the term micro school. So at the time, no one understood what we were doing unless they had direct experience. And I think that's changing now, and it's wonderful that it's changing. One of the things that I guess I'm concerned about as someone who's been an advocate and doing this for a while is just that there's lots of micro school resources now. I was in an interview the other day, and I said, kind of everybody is a micro school expert, and there's all these micro school consultants, and which again, I think is wonderful because we want to shine a light, especially on grassroots micro schools. But it can be overwhelming because you're not sure who you need to connect with, and is everyone truly an expert? And in terms of a lawyer, I'm sure that at some point, or maybe at some point, there will be lawyers who are specialize in micro schools, but in 2009, there wasn't anyone like that. And there weren't really any resources for micro schools, which is why we created our membership piece and we created our How to Start a Micro School online course and collaborated with other people who had started micro schools because there weren't any resources available. So that is kind of a little bit about legal and financial. One of the questions, another sustainability question, is related to marketing, right? So how do you effectively communicate your mission and philosophy? Does anybody have any marketing questions? I'm gonna grab my notes here. Pull up my marketing notes. And I'm going to share my screen again. There we go. Okay. All right, so marketing. This is one of the slides that we shared in our How to Start a Micro School presentation that we did previously. We've done several places. The bare minimum I think that you need is a Facebook page. And actually, when we did our first Microschool conference in 2000, I think it was 2016 or 2017, we had a presenter participant who had founded OutSchool. And OutSchool was, now I think a lot of us know OutSchool, but OutSchool was a little baby startup at the time. And he came and he did an amazing session about just kind of what his vision was and what he saw happening. And he really was spot on. I think it's looking back on that, he's kind of saw that homeschooling was going to become, more popular. And of course, no one was predicting pandemic necessarily, but and he said one of the questions from one of the attendees was, what is the bare minimum that we need in terms of marketing? He said a Facebook page. Telling a compelling story is very important. Who, what, where, when, why, how. I think micro schools are businesses that are people driven, so connections matter. I always say start with who you know, because it is overwhelming thinking about enrolling, right? Where are we going to, some people start out with a really well-established community. In my case, because I was a traveling tutor for homeschool families, I had this group of families that were interested in doing something more, and we needed a designated space. And that's how the first microschool came to be. Interestingly, not everyone who I was working with at the time came over to the microschool. In fact, most of them did not. But I think that was because the location where we ended up was not necessarily, I was traveling very far, pretty long distances to work with these families. And they were, I was in basements, we were in garages. You can imagine that wasn't very sustainable. And so when I decided, hey, we need a space, and I think other people agreed, just wasn't necessarily convenient for everyone, but not everyone came over. But if you start with the people that you already know, or you already have a well-established community, that certainly will make marketing easier, and it will help your school to be more sustainable. Having a very invested community and keeping them invested is important when it comes to sustainability. Elevate your marketing with branding, logo, professional website. All those things are great. Not everybody is able to do that right away. We certainly were not able to do that back in 2009, 2010. So that happened a little bit at a time for us. And then professional affiliation. I think more micro schools need to consider this as we see more micro schools pop up. I think all of us are very kind of tied to our independence, and we like being independent, which is great. But I think we need to collaborate more. That's why we have our membership piece. We have monthly office hours where we just connect and share stories kind of like this, because I think being connected and being affiliated is important, and that's something that prospective families are looking for too. Okay, somebody has a marketing question. Let's see. How did you market to investors? No, we did not market to investors. because for me personally, that would have been more work. And I always said, I was interviewed by, who was it? US News and World Report. And he said, do you need a lot of money to start a micro school? And I said, no, some people do. Some people start out with a lot of money, capital, or have started other successful businesses, and then they start a micro school. We did not have a lot of money, but we had a lot of time. And I started the micro school before I had children. Not that you can't start a micro school. Most people I know who are starting micro schools are either starting them for their children or have children. But I didn't. And so I made a lot of the materials myself. My husband built the furniture for the very first micro school. We still have that furniture. And I spent hours. I mean, it was up until 2 and 3 in the morning. I still remember those nights, really the first year and into the second. And so we did not have a lot of money, but had a lot of time. And that was, I mean, time is money, right? I mean, I guess it depends on how you look at that, but I was not necessarily looking at, finding investors at the time. I wasn't looking at the business in that way. I received some materials that were donated. And one of the things that I have talked to other aspiring micro school leaders about is looking for materials at school closings, because there are, especially in the Montessori world, in the private sector right now, there are a lot of schools that are closing, larger schools that are closing. And so looking for materials at those kinds of events can be something that you can do. But no, there was never really a plan to market to investors. And even in the last, 12 years or so that we've been doing this, that hasn't necessarily been a priority. We have generated our revenue primarily through tuition. And that was another question that we had. Let's see at our sustainability conference. Yes, how can you finance a micro school? That was one of the top questions that we got. How can you finance a micro school so that is sustainable, but also accessible and equitable? That was a great question that we got, that we did include in our sustainability conference. And we have financed our micro schools primarily through tuition, because I personally like to keep it simple. And when it comes to accessibility, making it accessible, making it equitable, you can do things like, I've seen other micro schools do things like scholarships and sliding scale tuition. Carol Top has talked about that. Carol Top, the homeschool CPA, that's her trade name. She's talked quite a bit about some of the downfalls of doing that. And then having parents volunteer. Then you get into territory where that may or may not be legal depending on your business entity. So these are all things that, as a business owner, a micro school teacher, leader, you have to consider. And so I think it's always been important for us to be accessible and equitable, but we didn't necessarily try to do all those things at once. And that has helped us in many ways. The first goal was to just get the school launched, and then we've launched other schools since then. And keeping the doors open has been a priority. And then once you're able to do that, and once you have a solid funding source, and for us that's tuition, then you can look at things like scholarships and ways to make it more accessible. Can you spell in the chat these resources? Yes. So the one that I just mentioned was Carol Top. You can go to our website as well, meridian-learning.org, and you'll see our community resources page. And you'll see her a preview of her session that she did. But I believe her website is homeschoolcpa.com. So I will put that up there. Any other ones that I mentioned, feel free to type those in, and I will put those in the chat. do you need to have a minimum enrollment to officially open? I have a lot of interested families who really expect this to be free. Oh, yes, like a public school, or like if the parents were homeschooling, right? So I think I talked a little bit in the beginning about parent education. It's a thing. It's definitely a thing, and it's something that we have had to incorporate. So back to sustainability. We have had to incorporate a lot more parent education than I ever anticipated we would have to. And I think the last 2 years, because of the pandemic, it actually created more. It created, there were things that were made better for us because of that, even though, obviously the circumstances were terrible, but then it also created, more work in terms of parent education, because you have families now who are interested in microschools, and it's changed, over the last 2 years, the families who are interested in microschools. I mean, when I started, it was, we kind of pulled somewhat from the homeschool community. We attracted families who were just looking for alternative schools, and that's still happening, of course. Our minimum. Oh, is Carol here? Oh, cool. Carol, you're here. Okay. Homeschoolcpa.com. Yes. Okay. Homeschoolcpa.com. And then she's typed it in there, /microschool. So our minimum enrollment to officially open, it depends. I mean, at the time, I think in 2009, it was 6. So we needed 6. I mean, technically, officially, if you look at the definition of a microschool, and I know that it's changing, but we kind of spelled out what a microschool was back in 2017. We worked with a group of people who had been microschooling, and we kind of came up with a collaborative definition of 15 students or less. There's some variation going on there, but I think, again, Wikipedia has that right. It says a microschool is 15 students or less, and really, in my mind and my experience, that is correct. So for us, it was 6. But the very first microschool we opened was on our property. I don't think I mentioned that, but that is an important piece of information, I think, to share, because the building was on our property. The previous owner had used it as a home office, and we converted it into a school. So our minimum at that time was 6, but it really depends on, your expenses and how much money you have starting out. And this is why it's very important to have a business plan. And, that's part of the whole ducks in a row. So that was our minimum. And then the second part of that was you have a lot of interested families who expect this to be free. So that's the part where parent education is important. And just kind of spelling it out for them. And we have had a number of parent education events. We've been doing those virtually during the pandemic. And we've had to introduce those, because that's not necessarily something that we had done previously. But because you have more families, I think, who are leaving public schools or who are dissatisfied and looking for alternative options, they might be expecting it to be free. And so that's just the part where you have to kind of explain to them, this is a business, this is a private school, and we operate in microschools. Typically operate very similarly to private schools, but in our case, like at a fraction of the cost. A lot of the private schools are charging 20 or 30 or 40K per year in our area for tuition. And, and we're not doing that. And that's another thing that I've been talking a lot about is the micro school, set out to disrupt public education. Grassroots micro schools have never really been interested in what public schools are doing. If we're out to disrupt anyone, it's the private sector, which, I consider sort of the elite private sector, where these schools are charging $20, $30, or $40,000 per year, and we are charging much less than that. But it's explaining to families, this is where your tuition dollars are going, and this is why it's not free. But here's how we're hoping to make accessibility a priority for us. What does parent education look like for you? Would it be an in-person meeting? So we did do in-person meetings prior to the pandemic, making sure you send literature out that clearly states your objectives. My experience is that parents don't read the literature that you send out. And we do have, social media, and we have private parent sites that are password protected. we still, that in-person communication is very important. And, you know, we have a teacher leader who leads each one of our micro schools. And that's something that we talk a lot about at the beginning of the school year, is just, we call it like touching base, right, with families, trying to do that at drop off or trying to do it at pickup, because having events is also can be a challenge. You know, prior to the pandemic, it was difficult for people to show up. And scheduling a parent education event when people could be there, I think that has been made easier switching it to virtual. But yeah, the literature is important. I mean, certainly that in that marketing slide that I shared, you know, making it very clear your mission and your school story, your personal story. If you are a, you know, single person, you know, a teacher who's starting a micro school, sharing your motivation. And if you can do that in person with families, that's great, but also doing that via social media. Did your attorney assist with your business plan? My attorney at the time, so this was in 2008, did look over the business plan. He did not assist with building the business plan, but he did look over it. And again, I think I shared that I started imagining this micro school in 2006. And I wasn't calling it a micro school then, but that's what it was. And then we started using the term micro school around 2008, 2009. But he didn't really assist with building. I mean, I really worked on that business plan. I was thinking about that the other day because, you know, I was thinking, how long did I really plan the school? I mean, probably over the course of 2 years to a year and a half, 18 months to 24 months, I worked on the business plan. And I don't think I used a template, but I did look at other people's business plans. Was there another resource you used? Yeah, I looked at other businesses plans. I mean, there was no micro school business plan at the time, right? I think I may have looked at like the business plan for a fitness business. I vaguely remember this. This is a while ago, right? It was like 13, 14 years ago. But I remember looking at somebody who had like a traveling fitness business. There may be like a personal coach or something. And they had a business plan. I remember, you know, kind of pulling some of the things from there, but I looked at a lot of business plans. You mentioned that similar to a private school, does this mean there are separate legal issues you must consider versus being a business? I run mine as an LLC, enrichment classes. Is this comparable to Meridian? So Meridian is still an LLC. I started the LLC in 2008. Meridian is still an LLC. And as I mentioned earlier, we've contemplated other things, or still contemplating them. We'll continue to contemplate them. But for right now, that's what we're doing, and it's working well for us. Yes. So there are separate legal issues that you might consider. And it really depends on your state. So all of our schools are now, all of the Meridian micro schools are in Ohio. And there is a special designation in Ohio for, Carol Top is very familiar with this because Carol's in Ohio too, but there's a special designation for non-chartered, non-public schools. And so we have that, I guess I consider an advantage. There's some disadvantage there too, because we have to do things a certain way. We have to do things maybe a little bit differently than we would have, but not much, in order to operate that way. So yes, and again, I think it's very state specific, because I know there are states like West Virginia that are passing micro school legislation. That's something we've been talking about in our monthly office hours chats, is how we feel about legislation around micro schools, especially those of us who've been doing this for a while, because the grassroots micro school community that's been around for a while hasn't really been consulted when it comes to this new legislation. You know, that I think is something that we need to continue to talk about. So that comment, that makes sense, offering an event and not just literature, right? Yeah, I think making the parent education event, and we actually have that built into our parent contract, is that parents must attend at least one parent education event per school year. That is built into our contract. We usually offer 2, and now that we've been doing them virtually, we have had a better turnout. So I think we'll probably continue to do that. So that's a little bit about marketing. Marketing, I've talked about funding. I know I only have 45 minutes. Steve told me I only have 45 minutes. Legal and financial, administrative is the last sort of component, I think. Find. I think another question came in. Are your parent contracts available to look over? They are. All of our registration materials and parent contracts are online, but they're password protected. So that is something that if you reach out to me via email, I can share some of the information from our parent contract. We don't make them accessible in terms of like to the general public, but they are all online. And the reason that we have those password protected is because we want to meet with families. I meet with every family personally. We have 3 micro schools now, getting ready to launch the 4th, and I meet with every family personally, doing a lot of those on Zoom now. So that makes it more sustainable, because it was not really falling in the sustainability category for me to meet with everybody personally as we were adding micro schools. So now that we do that virtually, sometimes, not all the time, that makes it a little bit easier, but it's still very important to me to, as the director, to meet with every family. So yeah, if you want to reach out to me via email, Tasha at meridian-learning.org. So the administrative piece, one of the things I had shared about that earlier was that some of the things that we have done to help make the school more sustainable, like adding staff, creates more work in a way. And so I think outsourcing is something that I wanted to talk about because most micro school leaders are wearing many hats. And that's sort of the way the model exists, especially the grassroots micro school model. And I'm here to talk about grassroots micro schools, not necessarily the franchise ones or the ones that are associated with, ed tech companies. So I'm here to talk about grassroots micro schools. And I think most of us who are operating or teaching in grassroots micro schools, we're wearing a lot of hats, and that is sustainable only for so long. So one of the things that Meridian has had to do is outsource, and we've outsourced through technology and through, bringing in people like interns or contractors when that is something that we can do. And kind of also utilizing community resources as often as possible. So when you're thinking of, serving as an administrator and you're teaching, your time is also very important. And when I started the first micro school, I did not have classes on Fridays. So Meridian has been a 4-day model since 2009, really since 2008. And that is something that we have continued. You're seeing it happen more now in public schools, and that they're switching from a 5-day to a 4-day. It just made sense. I couldn't do everything that needed to be done. I think most teachers in whatever school environment they're in feel the same way. They would love to have a day that is just for administrative work, and that is how we set it up from the start, and how I felt like I could be the most efficient. So we had classes 4 days a week, and then Friday was an admin day for me. We also used it as a makeup day, and we've done that for the last 13 or so years. The exception is that in our elementary school, Meridian Micro School, we added what we call field trip Fridays. We don't do it every Friday, but it's kind of based on demand. And we also did that because we needed to have a 5-day program in order to fulfill our kind of how we're operating here in the state we're in. So we added the 5th day, and that was something that has worked very well. But building that time in for administrative work is very important, because if you are teaching now, obviously if you're just the administrator, if you're just serving as the director and you're not also teaching in the micro school, that would be something that wouldn't necessarily be as necessary. But for those of us who are teaching, and I have continued to teach I'm, still there half day teaching, and then the other half of the day I do administrative work, but it was not sustainable for me to be teaching classes or guiding classes every day on top of doing the administrative work. Yes, I'm close to wrapping up. I just finished the last component. We talked about marketing, funding, legal, financial, and administrative. Yes, I will put my email in the chat. Here's my email, my direct email. Okay, let me double check that. There we go. All right, any other questions before I log off? Had a lot of great questions. I really appreciate your questions, and I'm so excited to see the grassroots microschool movement growing. It's something that we've been working toward for a while. And well, here's one more question. Let's see. Do you have 3 different locations, or do you own space? We do not own space. No, the very first micro school, we owned the space. And then we, that had its own challenge because it was on our property. And I talked to a lot of aspiring micro school leaders who like the idea of starting it out of their home, or that's how they're starting it. And I think that is, a viable way to start, and not necessarily a bad way to start, but there are things you need to consider. We had very understanding neighbors, and, kind of your own sort of appetite for risk too, depending on how you're operating. But that it became a little bit challenging operating it from our space. And then when we looked at purchasing space there, it just wasn't, it wasn't the right time for that. So we do have 3 different locations. They're all in the same neighborhood, which is really necessary because we do a lot of collaboration, and we utilize a lot of the resources in our community, like our local library, our local park. So we do not own any of the spaces right now. At some point, that might be something that we consider doing. We have considered purchasing the space, but for right now, we've had a good relationship with the building owners. And actually, it's a 1 building over for 2 of our buildings, and then we have another owner for the 3rd space, and then I think we'll have possibly another owner for the space or the school we're getting ready to launch in the fall. So we're still working those details out. So for each age, is there only 1 class? Yes, it's a single, it's a 1-room schoolhouse basically. So we have 3 different locations, and then it's multi-age classes, a single class. So we have a toddler class, which is 18 months to 36 months. And then we have parent-child classes in that school, in that space. And then we have we're Montessori based. So we don't go by grade, we go by age. And then we have a 3 to 6 school for 3 to 6-year-olds. And then we have our elementary Meridian Microschool is for 6 to 12-year-olds. And the adolescent school that we're getting ready to launch next year it's actually a micro farm, is for 12 to 18. So it's a single class. Not all of our students attend every day. So we do have part-time options, especially for homeschooling families, because we evolved from homeschooling, microschooling evolved from homeschooling. It was very important for us to continue to have a homeschool option. And so we have continued to have a, part-time, what we consider a part-time option for kind of specifically for our homeschool families. You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me, Steve. I'm not sure if Steve is here, but thanks for inviting me. I'm so happy to share my story, and I look forward to seeing all of your schools. Any other questions before I log off? All right. Thanks so much.